The airplane cabin was a world of its own, a long metal tube suspended in the endless dark sky. Inside, it was quiet, save for the constant deep hum of the engines that felt more like a vibration in the bones than a sound in the ears. Most people were sleeping, or at least trying to, with little blankets pulled up to their chins and eye masks blocking out the dim, blue-tinged light. In the comfortable, spacious seats at the front of the plane, a man sat perfectly still. He was not sleeping. His name was Julian Thorne, and he was a very important man, the boss of a huge company called Apex Dynamics. To anyone looking, he seemed the picture of success. His clothes were expensive and neat, not a wrinkle out of place. But if you looked closer, past the surface, you could see the truth. His face was pale, etched with lines of deep tiredness that no amount of money could erase. Under his eyes were dark shadows like smudges of charcoal. The light from his laptop screen glowed cold and bright, throwing sharp lines across his features. On that screen were numbers, charts, and long documents filled with complicated words. He was working on the biggest deal of his life, a plan to take over another company, a smaller, family-owned one named Greenwood & Co. His mind was racing, calculating, planning every move. It was a game of chess, and he was determined to win, but his head was pounding. A dull, persistent ache had started behind his eyes and was now spreading through his whole skull. He squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, pressing his fingers hard against his temples, trying to push the pain away. He felt heavy, like all the long days and sleepless nights were finally piling up on top of him, right here in this quiet cabin. It was in this moment of quiet struggle that a small voice cut through the silence. Clear and sweet like a little bell. "You seem weary." "Sir?" The words were so simple, so honest, they seemed to hang in the air. Julian's eyes snapped open. He turned his head. In the next seat over in the aisle seat was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She had large, bright eyes that looked at him with pure, open concern. There was no shyness in her, just a child's direct way of seeing the truth and saying it. She wasn't trying to be polite or impress him. She was just stating a fact she saw with her own eyes. A woman, who he assumed was her mother, leaned over quickly, her face flushing with a gentle embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," the mother whispered to Julian, pulling the girl back gently. "Please don't bother the man, sweetheart." Julian gave them a small, tight smile. It was the kind of smile he used in meetings when he wasn't really listening. "It's quite all right," he said, his voice a low, tired murmur. He turned back to his laptop screen, the blue light once again washing over his face, but he couldn't focus. The words on the screen blurred together. The little girl's sentence echoed in his mind. "You seem weary, sir." No one had spoken to him like that in years. People talked to him all the time. They said, "You look busy, sir." Or, "The board is waiting for your decision," or, "The numbers look great." Julian. They saw the powerful boss, the man with all the answers, the man who made deals happen. This little girl didn't see any of that. She didn't see the CEO. She didn't see the expensive suit or the important laptop. She just saw a man, a tired, weary man. And in her simple 6-word observation, she had seen more of the real him than anyone else had in a very, very long time. He tried to shake it off. He took a sip of the water the flight attendant had given him, but it did nothing to ease the strange, hollow feeling in his chest. He glanced sideways again. The girl was now focused on a coloring book. Her small hand, clutching a bright blue crayon, moved with sure, happy strokes across the page. She was completely absorbed in her own little world, a world of color and imagination, a world away from financial models and takeover strategies. After a few minutes, she looked up and caught him watching her. Instead of looking away, she gave him a small, shy smile. Then she slowly held up her coloring book for him to see. It was a picture of a big, friendly-looking bear in a forest. But this was no ordinary bear. She had colored it not brown or black, but a wonderful, vibrant purple. The trees around it were a mix of green and orange, and the sky was a soft, rosy pink. "It's a berry-eating bear," she explained softly, her voice full of seriousness. "He only eats purple berries. That's why he's purple." Julian looked at the purple bear. He looked at the girl's hopeful, proud face. And for the first time on that flight, for the first time in many weeks, a real, genuine feeling stirred inside him. It wasn't a calculated thought or a business decision. It was a feeling. A small, warm spark of simple human connection. A real smile, weak but true, touched his lips. It felt strange on his face, like a muscle he hadn't used in a long time. "It's a very good bear," he said, and he meant it. In that moment, surrounded by the sleeping passengers and the hum of the plane, the powerful CEO and the little girl with the purple bear shared a tiny, quiet bubble of understanding. The weight on his shoulders felt just a little bit lighter. The weariness was still there, but now it felt seen, and for some reason he couldn't explain, that made all the difference. The little girl's smile was like a key turning in a lock. For a few seconds, the towering wall Julian had built around himself, the wall of business, stress, and endless deadlines, had a crack in it. Light was getting through. He slowly reached out and closed the lid of his laptop. The sharp blue light vanished, and the cabin seemed suddenly softer, quieter. The numbers and documents were locked away. He turned his body slightly in his large seat to face the girl a little more. "A berry-eating bear," Julian repeated, his voice low so as not to disturb the sleeping mother. "I've never seen one of those before." The girl nodded, her eyes wide with the importance of her own creation. "They're very rare. You have to be very quiet to find them." She held the coloring book a little closer to him, pointing a small finger at a squiggle of green near the bear's feet. "These are the berry bushes." "I see," Julian said, playing along. He found himself leaning in, looking at the details of her drawing. The world she had created was messy, joyful, and full of impossible colors. It was the complete opposite of the neat, orderly black and white world of his spreadsheets. They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment. The girl went back to coloring, this time giving a rabbit a bright orange coat. Julian didn't open his laptop. He just watched her, fascinated by her complete focus on this simple, creative task. He couldn't remember the last time he had been so absorbed in something that wasn't work. "My dad," the girl said, not looking up from her orange rabbit. "He used to take me to see the real forest." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but the words caught Julian off guard. There was a story in her tone. "Oh?" he said gently. "That sounds nice." "It was," she said, putting her crayon down. She looked out the window at the darkness, but she wasn't seeing the dark. She was seeing something else. "We would walk on these paths. It was so quiet you could hear your own heart. And the air, it smelled like old trees and wet earth. It was a good smell." She struggled to find the right words, her small face pinched in thought. "And there was a little stream. The water talked to the stones. It went shh all day long. The water talked to the stones." The poetic simplicity of the phrase struck Julian right in the chest. It was a child's way of describing the sound of a babbling brook, but it was more beautiful and true than any grown-up description he had ever heard. "It sounds very peaceful," he managed to say. The girl nodded, but a shadow passed over her face. "He's gone now, my dad. So we don't go to the forest anymore," and there it was. A whole world of loss contained in one simple sentence from a little girl. Julian didn't know what to say. I'm very sorry to hear that," he whispered, the words feeling completely inadequate. She just shrugged a little, a brave, small movement. "It's okay. I have the pictures in my head." She looked back at him, her big eyes studying his face again. "Do you ever go to the forest, mister?" The question was like a pinprick. It was so innocent, so direct. It should have had a simple answer, yes or no. But for Julian, it wasn't simple at all. His mind, which had been so full of business plans just minutes before, suddenly went somewhere else. It traveled back through years, through decades, to a time before he was a CEO, before he was even a businessman. He was a boy again. He saw a memory, clear and sharp as a photograph. He was standing on a dirt path early in the morning. The air was cool and misty, just like the girl had described. He could almost smell the pine needles. Next to him was his own father, a man who worked with his hands and knew the names of all the trees. His father put a hand on his small shoulder and pointed up. "Listen," he had whispered. And Julian, the boy, had listened. He heard a clear looping song coming from a tall pine tree. "That's a wood thrush," his father said softly. "He's telling us good morning." In that memory, he felt a feeling he had completely forgotten. It was a feeling of peace, of being small in a very big, beautiful world, of being connected to something real and ancient and good. He remembered making a promise to himself on that trail, a boy's promise. He promised he would never get so busy that he would forget the sound of that bird, the smell of that air. The memory faded, leaving a cold, hollow feeling in his stomach. He looked down at his hands. They were the hands of a 50-year-old man. They typed on keyboards. They shook hands in deal-making. They held expensive pens to sign contracts that changed companies and lives. But they hadn't touched the rough bark of a tree in 30 years. He looked at the girl, her innocent, waiting face. "No," he said, and his voice was rough with a truth he didn't want to face. "No, I don't go to the forest." He didn't just mean he didn't visit the woods. He meant he had lost his way. He had broken his promise. The boy who loved the sound of the wood thrush had grown into a man who was trying to destroy a company called Greenwood & Co. A company built by people who probably still heard the birds, who still valued the very things he had left behind. The plane began its gradual descent. The pilot's voice came over the speaker, talking about preparing for landing. The spell was broken. The mother stirred, waking up and gently telling the girl to put her crayons away. As the plane taxied to the gate, Julian felt numb. He packed his laptop away, his movements slow and automatic. The little girl and her mother gathered their things. When they stood up to leave, the girl turned to him one last time. She gave him a small, sweet wave. "Bye, mister," she said, and then she added the words that would follow him for a long, long time. "I hope you find your forest." Then she was gone, disappearing down the aisle with her mother. Julian sat alone in the sudden quiet of the empty first-class cabin. The words echoed in his mind, each one a hammer blow on his conscience. "I hope you find your forest." He looked out the window at the busy airport, the flashing lights, the people rushing. He was at the top of his game, about to seal the most successful deal of his career. But in that moment, he had never felt more lost. The little girl, without even trying, had shown him that he was the weariest, poorest man on the entire plane. And he knew, with a terrible certainty, that he could not go through with his plan. Not after remembering who he used to be. The city air felt different. It was thick and tasted of car exhaust and concrete, a world away from the quiet, recycled atmosphere of the airplane. Julian stepped out of the sleek black car that had picked him up from the airport and walked into the towering glass building that housed his company. The familiar sounds of his world rushed to meet him, the sharp click of his shoes on the polished marble floor, the quiet hum of the elevator, the distant ringing of telephones. It was a world of hard surfaces and clear, sharp lines. But for the first time, it felt strange to him. The sounds were too loud. The lights were too bright. It was as if he had left a part of himself back on that plane, sitting in that quiet seat next to the little girl and her purple bear. He went straight to his office on the top floor. It was a vast, beautiful room with a breathtaking view of the city and the bay. Everything in it was expensive and perfect. The large, empty desk was made of a single piece of dark, polished wood. The chairs were made of the finest leather. It was a room designed to impress, to show power and control. But today it felt like a cage. He sat down, but he didn't turn on his computer. He just stared out the huge window. The words from the little girl played over and over in his mind like a song he couldn't forget. "I hope you find your forest." And then, the memory of his own father's voice joined hers. "Listen, that's a wood thrush." He felt a tightness in his chest. It was a feeling he hadn't felt in years. It was the feeling of being two different people trapped inside one skin. One was the boy who loved the quiet woods. The other was the man in this expensive suit, in this glass tower, about to crush a company that stood for everything the boy had loved. A few hours later, the door to his office opened. His team walked in. These were the men and women who helped him run the company. They were sharp, ambitious, and they understood the language of money and power perfectly. They settled around the large meeting table in the corner of his office, their faces eager and excited. The head of the team, a man with a confident smile, placed a thick folder on the table. "We're ready," the man said. "The final plan for the Greenwood takeover is locked in. It's brutal, it's beautiful, and it will make us a fortune." Julian slowly walked over and took his seat at the head of the table. He felt like he was moving in a dream. The air in the room was buzzing with energy, but he felt completely separate from it. The man began to speak, pointing to charts and graphs projected on the wall. "Phase 1 is immediate and deep cost-cutting. We shut down their main factory, the one in that small town. The labor there is too expensive. We move all production overseas where it's cheaper." Julian looked at the chart. It showed numbers and arrows going up, but in his mind he didn't see rising profits. He saw people. He saw faces of men and women who probably worked at that factory for generations, people who took pride in their work. He imagined a small town, its heart torn out, a main street with closed shops and broken dreams. Their product line is too focused on this quality and durability nonsense, another woman added, tapping her pen on the table. We can use cheaper materials, synthetic fabrics. We can increase our profit margin on each jacket by 40%. We'll sell more because they'll wear out faster. Cheaper materials. The words echoed in the quiet wood-paneled room. Julian thought of the little girl's coloring book. The careful, joyful strokes of her crayon. It was made with care. The things Greenwood made, he realized, were also made with care. They were built to last, to be part of people's adventures, to be trusted. This plan was to turn something good into something disposable. The head of the team leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. And the best part? We'll keep the name Greenwood. It sounds wholesome. People will still buy it for a while, not knowing the quality is gone. We'll squeeze every last dollar out of that brand's good reputation before we eventually phase it out. A cold wave washed over Julian. This wasn't just business anymore. This felt like a betrayal. It was like taking someone's good name and using it to tell a lie. He thought of the girl's simple, honest observation. You seem weary, sir. She saw the truth. This plan was the opposite of truth. It was a carefully constructed lie, designed to make money from people's trust. He looked around the table at the eager, smiling faces of his team. They were brilliant. They were successful. But in that moment, he saw that they had no forest. They only had spreadsheets. They saw a company as a collection of assets and liabilities, not as a community, not as a legacy. The memory of the little girl's loss filled his mind. My dad, he's gone now, so we don't go to the forest anymore. He was about to make it so that many other fathers and mothers, sons and daughters, would lose their connection to something they loved. He was about to destroy their forest too. He couldn't do it. The head of the team finished his presentation and looked at Julian, waiting for the final approval, the proud smile of a boss who had just been handed a certain victory. The room was silent, waiting for him to speak. Julian took a deep, slow breath. It felt like the first real breath he had taken since he got off the plane. He placed his hands flat on the cool surface of the table. This plan, he began, his voice quiet but clear. It is very efficient. The numbers are impressive. A few people nodded, smiles beginning to form. But, Julian said, and the room froze. We will not be doing this. The silence that followed was heavy and shocked. You could have heard a pin drop. The head of the team blinked. I'm sorry, sir? Do you mean adjustments? I mean, Julian said, looking at each of their confused faces in turn. We are not going forward with this takeover. Not like this, he stood up. He needed to be standing for this. This company, Greenwood, it stands for something. It's not just a brand. It's about craftsmanship. It's about things made to last. It's about people who take pride in their work. He was speaking from his heart, using words he hadn't used in 30 years. What you are proposing, it's not building anything. It's just draining the life out of something beautiful until there's nothing left but an empty shell. The head of the team stared at him as if he were speaking a foreign language. Julian, with all respect, that's not the point. The point is shareholder value. The point is growth. This is how the game is played. That's the problem, Julian said, his voice growing stronger. It's not a game. Real people's lives are at stake. A whole town. A way of doing things that has meaning. He thought of the little girl's father. He thought of his own father. I will not be the man who destroys that. He looked at his stunned team. So here is the new plan. We are not taking over Greenwood. We are going to propose a partnership. We will use our money and our reach to help them grow, but on their terms. We will help them open new stores, but they will control the quality. We will keep their factory open. We will protect the way they make their products. The room erupted. Voices overlapped, loud and confused. This is insane. The board will never allow it. We'll become a laughingstock. You're throwing away millions. Julian listened to the noise. It was the sound of his old world crashing against the new one he was trying to build. He felt a strange sense of calm in the middle of the storm. For the first time in a long time, he was not making a decision based on fear or greed. He was making it based on something that felt like truth. He waited for the voices to die down. The decision is made. he said, his voice final and firm. We will find a better way, or we will walk away. He turned and walked back to his desk, leaving his team in a state of utter disbelief and turmoil. He had just started a war with his own company, with his own board of directors, with everything he had built his life upon. But as he sat down and looked out at the city, he didn't feel weary anymore. He felt something else. He felt scared, yes, but underneath the fear he felt a small, quiet spark of hope. He was finally, after all these years, listening to the wood thrush. And he was going to find his forest no matter what it cost him. The news traveled through the company like a lightning strike. The CEO had lost his mind. That was the whisper in the elevators, the muttered conversation over coffee machines. He had thrown away the deal of the decade for a feeling, for a story about a little girl on a plane. The people who worked for him, the ones who understood profit and loss, could not understand this at all. Julian knew this. He felt their confused looks in the hallway. He saw the emails from the board of directors, their words formal and cold, demanding an immediate meeting. But he did not go to the boardroom. He did not answer the angry emails with long explanations. Instead, he did something that shocked everyone even more. He got on another plane. This time he wasn't flying to a big city for a meeting. He was flying to a small regional airport, the kind that only had a couple of gates. From there, he rented a simple car and drove. He left behind the wide, fast highways and turned onto smaller roads that twisted and turned through rolling hills. The glass and steel of the city were replaced by the deep, solid green of tall, ancient trees. He was driving toward the small town that was the home of Greenwood & Co. He was going to the very place he had once planned to shut down. As he drove into the town, the air itself changed. It became cleaner, filled with the scent of pine and fresh-cut grass. The town was not big. There was a main street with small shops, an old-fashioned diner, and a park with a wooden bandstand. It was quiet and peaceful. People on the sidewalk nodded to each other, taking their time. He found the Greenwood factory on the edge of town. It wasn't a giant, ugly building of concrete and smoke. It was a long, low building made of warm, reddish wood, with big windows that let in the sunlight. It looked like it belonged there, like it had grown from the ground alongside the trees. The sign out front was simple, hand-carved and painted in earthy colors. He parked his car and just sat for a moment looking. He could hear the gentle whir of machinery, not the loud, angry roar of a big industrial plant, but a softer, rhythmic sound. It was the sound of work, but it was calm. Taking a deep breath, he walked to the front door and stepped inside. The first thing that hit him was the smell. It was a rich, wonderful mix of leather, waxed canvas, and wood. It was the complete opposite of the sterile, scentless air of his office. This was a smell you could feel. It was honest. A woman at a front desk looked up and smiled. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice friendly. For a second, Julian didn't know what to say. He was the man who had almost destroyed this place. He felt a wave of shame. "My name is Julian," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I was hoping I might speak with someone about the company." He was led to a small office where an older man was working. The man had a kind, weathered face and hands that looked strong and capable. He had the look of someone who had spent a lifetime doing work he believed in. He stood up and shook Julian's hand. His grip was firm and real. "I'm the manager here," the man said. "What can I do for you?" Julian decided there was no other way but the truth. He sat down and looked the man directly in the eyes. "You may know my company, Apex Dynamics," he began. The older man's friendly expression became careful and guarded. He nodded slowly. He knew. Everyone in the factory knew about the threat from the big city corporation. "I am the CEO," Julian said. The room went very still. The manager's face became a mask. He was waiting for the bad news, for the official notice that his life's work was over. Julian continued, his words tumbling out. "I came here to tell you that the takeover, the plan we had, it's not happening. Not in the way we intended." He then did something he had never done in a business meeting. He told a personal story. He told the manager about the long flight, about his weariness, and about the little girl with the big, honest eyes who had seen right through him. He talked about her purple bear and her simple question, "Do you ever go to the forest, mister?" He spoke of the memory of his own father and the sound of the wood thrush. His voice was thick with emotion. He admitted that he had lost his way. He told the man that he had looked at the plans to shut down this factory and use cheaper materials, and it had felt like a betrayal of everything good. "I am not here as your enemy," Julian said, his voice barely a whisper. "I am here to understand. I am here to apologize for the fear we have caused. And I am here to see if there is another way, a way where my company can help yours without destroying what makes it special." The older man listened in complete silence. He didn't interrupt. He just watched Julian's face, listening not just to the words but to the feeling behind them. He was looking for the truth. When Julian finished, the man didn't speak for a long time. He looked down at his own rough, capable hands. Then he looked back at Julian. "That's quite a story," the manager said slowly. "Would you like to see what it is you almost destroyed?" Julian nodded, a feeling of hope stirring in his chest. The manager stood up. He didn't take Julian to a conference room to look at charts. He took him into the heart of the factory. They walked through the workshop. Julian saw people, men and women of all ages, working at stations. They weren't just assembly line workers. They were craftspeople. One woman was carefully cutting thick pieces of leather, her hands moving with sure, confident skill. Another man was stitching a heavy canvas jacket, his needle going in and out in a perfect, steady rhythm. He was singing a quiet song to himself as he worked. The manager stopped by a woman who was inspecting a finished backpack. "She's been with us for 30 years, the manager said to Julian. "Her father worked here before her. She knows every stitch." The woman looked up and smiled, holding up the backpack. "This one's going on a long hike," she said proudly. "It needs to be strong." They walked on. Julian saw how the workers treated the materials with respect. They ran their hands over the fabrics, feeling for any imperfection. They polished the brass zippers until they shone. There was no rush. There was only care. The manager picked up a finished wool shirt. "Feel this," he said, handing it to Julian. Julian took it. The fabric was thick and soft and warm. It felt alive. It felt like it could last a lifetime. "This isn't just a product," the manager said, his voice filled with a quiet passion. "This is a tool for someone's life, for their adventure, for their memory. We're not just making things here. We're making trust." The words landed deep in Julian's soul. Making trust. That was what his own company had forgotten how to do. At the end of the tour, they stood by a large door that led to a trailhead behind the factory. The forest was right there, just steps away. "The best way to understand what we do," the manager said, "is to understand why we do it. Would you like to take a short walk?" Julian looked at the path leading into the tall, quiet trees. He felt a pull, a calling from a very old part of himself. "Yes," he said, "I would like that very much." He stepped out of the factory and onto the soft earth of the forest path. The air was cool and clean. He could smell the pine needles and the wet soil. He could hear the wind whispering through the high branches. He was quiet. He was listening. He wasn't the powerful CEO anymore. He was just a man standing at the edge of the forest, finally coming home. The path was soft under his expensive leather shoes. The sounds of the town and the factory faded away, replaced by a deep, living silence. It wasn't an empty silence, but a full one. It was filled with the whisper of the wind in the pine needles, the distant call of a bird, the rustle of some small creature in the underbrush. Julian walked slowly, his hands in his pockets. The older manager walked beside him, not saying a word. He seemed to understand that Julian needed to just be here, to feel this place. With every step, the tight knot of stress that had lived in Julian's chest for years began to loosen. The cold, hard weight of his responsibilities seemed to lift from his shoulders. The air he breathed here didn't just fill his lungs. It felt like it was cleaning him from the inside out. He remembered the little girl's words. The air smelled like old trees and wet earth. It was a good smell. She was right. It was the best smell in the world. They came to a small, clear stream that cut across the path. The water bubbled and danced over smooth gray stones. Julian stopped and watched it. "The water talked to the stones," the girl had said. It went shh all day long. He listened and he heard it. It was a gentle, soothing sound, a sound that had been here for thousands of years and would be here for thousands more. It didn't care about stock prices or board meetings. He looked at the manager. "She was right," Julian said, his voice quiet with wonder. The manager simply nodded, a small, understanding smile on his face. In that moment, surrounded by the ancient trees and the talking water, Everything became perfectly clear to Julian. His old plan for Greenwood was not just wrong. It was a kind of blindness. It was like trying to measure the beauty of this forest by counting the trees and putting a price on each one. You would completely miss the point. The value was in the life of it, the peace of it, the way it made you feel whole. He knew what he had to do. It wasn't just about saving this one company. It was about changing his own. When he returned to the city the next day, he didn't feel like he was returning to a cage. He felt like he was entering a battlefield, but for the first time he knew exactly what he was fighting for. He called for a meeting with the entire board of directors. The room was tense. The men and women around the long polished table looked at him with stern, disapproving faces. They had seen the numbers. They knew the profit he had thrown away. One of the oldest board members spoke first, his voice sharp. "Julian, we need a full explanation for this. This sudden change of heart. You have acted against the direct interests of this company." Julian stood calmly. He didn't have a presentation. He didn't have any charts. He just had a story. He told them about the forest. He described the smell of the pine, the sound of the stream, the feeling of the soft earth under his feet. He told them about the people in the factory, their skilled hands, their pride in their work. He spoke about the idea of making trust. Some of the board members shifted in their seats, looking confused and impatient. They didn't understand what trees had to do with business. Then Julian looked at them, his gaze steady and strong. "For years we have measured success only in money. We have become very rich. But what is the cost?" He paused, letting the question hang in the air. "We have become weary. Our company has a soul, but we have forgotten how to hear it. We are so busy counting coins that we have forgotten how to build things that truly matter." He announced his new plan. He was not asking for their permission. He was telling them what was going to happen. "We are creating the Apex Greenwood Foundation," he said. "We will use our money and our power, not to crush but to lift up. We will partner with companies like Greenwood, companies that make things with care, that treat their workers with respect, that honor our world. We will help them grow without losing their soul. We will invest in things that are built to last, not just to be thrown away." The room was in an uproar. Voices shouted about risk, about tradition, about the duty to shareholders. But Julian stood firm. "This is the only way forward," he said, his voice rising above the noise. "This is how we build a legacy that is more than just a number in a bank account. This is how we find our own forest." The fight was long and hard. Some people on the board resigned. Some of his top team left. The business news channels talked about him like he had lost his mind. But Julian did not bend. The memory of the forest and the little girl's voice gave him a strength he didn't know he had. Slowly, something began to change. A story appeared in a newspaper. It wasn't on the business page. It was a human interest story. It was about the powerful CEO who changed his entire life because of a few words from a child on a plane. People loved it. They were tired of stories about greed. They were hungry for a story about hope. Customers, inspired by the story, started buying more from companies that Apex now supported. Young, bright people wanted to come work for a company with a purpose. The public saw Apex not as a cold giant, but as a leader. One afternoon, months later, Julian was in his office. The room was different now. On his desk next to his computer was a small framed picture. It was a drawing of a purple bear, colored with joyful, messy strokes. The little girl's mother had sent it to him after reading the news story, with a short, kind note. His assistant brought in a package. It was from the Greenwood factory. Inside was a simple, beautifully made wool shirt, the kind he had felt on his visit. There was no invoice. It was a gift. Julian took off his expensive suit jacket and put on the shirt. It was warm and comfortable. It felt like a hug. It felt real. He looked out his big window at the city. The skyline was the same, but he was not. The weary man was gone. He was still a CEO, but he was also a guardian. He was a builder. He had kept the promise he made to himself as a boy. He had found his forest, and he had made sure that many others could keep theirs too. The journey that began with a single kind observation on a plane had, in the end, led him home.